across this at an angle to show more information. Again, a reach. Sometimes you've got interior structure, sometimes you don't. But if you do, then you've got pretty good evidence. And sure enough, at that angle, you can see the bone in the interior. In fact, we've been able to trace ligaments from one end to the other. Dr. Dale Peterson of Oklahoma City, in fact, the last lecture I heard him give on this was an hour and a half, and you don't want to know all that about this. But he's traced the ligaments from one end to the other, and with the X-ray here, you can see the interior structure and the obvious shape. Down further south in Texas, about 100 miles south from Glen Rose, near London, Texas, is this rather picturesque scene where back about 1940, a fellow was fishing, saw a strange-looking rock, broke it open, and here's a hammer in it. This is the same geologic horizon that we have at Glen Rose. This is the lower Cretaceous. But the whole area is composed of the Cretaceous concretions, which is supposed to be 140 million years old. Obviously a turby fossil. Up in Oklahoma, we found this iron pot that was embedded in the coal, supposed to be 295 million years ago. Here's the affidavit of the fellow who was working for the utilities company, broke it open with a big sledgehammer, and here's the cast and the mold on either side, and the pot falls out. This is his description of it. That's obviously a turvy fossil. In Utah, near Blanding, Utah, Natural Bridges National Monument, we have these beautiful arches, and under them, the Anasazi Indians drew petroglyphs. And here we see Dr. Swift pointing towards some of the petroglyphs. Just above my head, you see the Anasazi warrior, and you see the snakes. But we almost have enough dark to see the Brontosaurus. That is very clearly there. Now, it's covered with desert varnish. Let me back up again here. And so it's very difficult to photograph, but there is the shape that is unmistakable that you can see. Once it's been pointed to, you can still see it pretty clearly. A turvy fossil. In Colorado, we have this made by the Fremont Indians, who were contemporary with the Anasazi, that looks like the Triceratops, the three horns, the frill down the back of the neck. It looks more like a Triceratops than some of the people there, supposedly represented by the Fremont Indians. Obviously a turvy fossil again. This one's from the Grand Canyon, again with a heavy desert varnish over it, which is an indication of antiquity. Somebody shot him in the tail, and you can see what happens if you tried to mess with it today. If you tried to do any carving, it would really show up. Breaking through that desert varnish. Another turvy fossil. Okay, let's travel down to South America and see other evidence that tests the column and shows these turvy fossils, which are the test, which is the use that we make of the column. Dr. Javier Cabrera passed away just a few years ago in December of the year 2000. We'd made several trips down there talking with him. And is a very interesting character. He was 20 years head of the Department of Medicine at the University of Lima. His father had begun collecting burial stones from the Inca tombs back in the 30s, and he continued collecting them. He now has had over 11,000 at the time of his death. He lives in a 300-year-old castle right there on the town square. His great-grandfather established the town, descendant of the conquistadors, and they live in this castle, and he's made part of it into a museum that displays these stones. About a third of them display some of the most disgusting pornography you could ever imagine, I hope. I won't show you those, but about a third of them show dinosaurs. We were able to get into the tombs, and we participated in excavations. If you see the video on this evidence, we've got an hour of this kind of evidence. We just got back from Peru about a week ago and brought back a big 70-pound stone. I'll show you in a moment. But you can see here in situ the stones in tombs, and they're still being dug up. This one is in Dr. Cabrera's office. It's about 2 feet tall, and a close-up so that you can see what it looks like. Interesting thing here is that you see the dermal frills on the back, these stair-step looking frills that weren't preserved in most of the fossils. When Mr. Sinclair made his sign depicting this kind of dinosaur, he didn't put the frills on the back, did he? We didn't know about it. They were first published in Geology in '91 and represented just like this, which is a stone from a tomb probably about 500 AD from the Nazca culture, actually pre-Inca. This is a large, huge stone in Dr. Cabrera's museum with a very obvious brontosaurus type with the frills on the back. You can see the close-up here along with other features there on the dinosaur. Looking at the top, you can see another dinosaur, this time with a man in his mouth, a foot. Very artistically done. Some are rather crude, obviously a wide variety of artists, but just hundreds of these. Many of them show the man and dinosaur in conflict. Some of them may be domesticated and somewhat stylized, rather artsy. Others more literal, but very obvious what type of dinosaur we're talking about. Very specific types are seen. Now some have said, well, but Dr. Cabrera is a strange fellow, and I'll acknowledge that, though he's obviously a very famous and very intelligent man. But you have a number of other places that display these types of stones that are just the opposite of what many say. Some of the archaeologists say, well, nobody knows anything about carved stones. This is just made up by Cabrera. And they're found all over Peru and displayed in national museums. This is the Aeronautical Museum in Lima. They have about 35 of the stones displayed, and at least 4 of them have dinosaurs on them. I was just there, and I had some beautiful photographs in the camera that was stolen, along with my computer, and I'll have to go back. But these were enough. This is another dinosaur on one of the stones there in the Aeronautical Museum. This is one of the, and we also saw them in the museum in Nazca, and I had great photographs, which I'm going to have to go back to get. This one I brought back with me. It's a 70-pound stone. It has 3 dinosaurs on it, and is of a slightly different style, found about 100 miles away from where the others were. This is on the Paracas Peninsula, about 100 miles from Nazca. And these are embossed, slightly raised from a bas-relief, whereas most of the ones in Dr. Cabrera's museum are incised. And you can see blood spots or body fluids from the mummy that was in the tomb with it, which is really intriguing. I think we're going to be able to date this. It's been a challenge to date well, you don't date the rock because that's not what's interesting. It's the carving on the rock that's interesting. How do you do that? Well, maybe this will allow us to do that. It was excavated in early 2006, this year. And these stones are continuing to be excavated. This is another stone that was excavated in 2005. Of course, Cabrera died in 2000. And you see a close-up there where this is slightly incised or embossed, and the close-up of the eye shows the saltpeter development growth in the grooves and the very obvious patina, which all indicate age. Also, in the tombs, you can see burial cloths and pottery, and they will display often the dinosaur motif. Now, it's kind of hard to do it precisely as you're weaving, but they did a pretty good job of depicting the dinosaur with their woven designs. The Moshi made beautiful vases. They're famous for this, and it's just impossible to reproduce. But look what they put on their vases. And this is about 2,000 to 2,500 years ago, these people were seeing dinosaurs. This is in the National Museum in Lima. Up in the northern part of Peru, they're gold death masks, but look what's on either side of the face. Here again, those dermal frills on his back and the long tail curling over his back and the huge teeth. We're seeing dinosaurs. These are the evidences from Peru that normally takes me an hour to tell about, but you've got about 5 minutes worth of it. Turvy fossils. Now, let's go to Mexico. This is another hour lecture, but we'll look quickly. In Guanajuato, down in Acámbaro, we heard about a discovery that had made by Jules Rudd back in the early part of the 1900s. It's difficult to skip over all of that. He uncovered or had in his collection some 33,000 ceramic figurines. And we had to go down there quite a few times in order to get all the evidence and learn and get permission and so forth. But we were able to see these, and about 10% of the 33,000 of the ceramic figurines are of dinosaurs. Some of the Brontosaurus type were standing up. We learned that about 15 years ago in Bacher's book, Dinosaur Heresies, maybe 20 years ago now. But you look at what they were depicting probably 2,500 years ago, according to the thermoluminescent dating that was done, is just like what Bacher is telling us. And of course, Spielberg convinced us they all stood up with his movie. But again, a wide variety. I have over 20,000 digital images of this collection, and you don't want to see them all. About 2,600 dinosaurs. And I'm sure there are more than that, but I was trying to be conservative. But is any question about what we're looking at there? It's, I think, very obvious. They now have them on display. When we arrived there, they had them hidden in the back of the police department. They were ashamed. This will embarrass us. And it took an act of Congress to get them out. And now then, they're in a museum, publicly displayed and very well displayed, and they tell the whole story. Now, the National Museum and the Institute of Archaeology just has fits about this, but they know the facts. They've got them documented, and so you can come see them. This is my wife's favorite. But I think the conclusion is obvious here, that man and dinosaurs live together. And we see evidence of this all over the world. We, earlier this year, traveled to Cambodia. I had been sent a very intriguing picture on the internet from a tour guide from this area where they had uncovered a temple and had investigated a certain section that showed some interesting carvings on the temple. But in the northern part of Cambodia, over next to Vietnam, Thailand, we see some beautiful, spectacular temples. These are actually the largest and probably the most spectacular ever built. The major builder was Jayavarman VII, the most famous. He began to rule in 1181, and his picture is seen here in Phnom Penh in the National Museum. I took this picture earlier this year. And he's the one that built most of these, and particularly built to Prom. Now, you may see some scenes here that look familiar. This was a Buddhist monastery dedicated in 1186, but Lara Croft took some of the scenes from this area. You may have seen that one. And it's beautiful. Just almost every square inch of this temple is covered by carvings. But in this section, there at the western gate, as you come in, there's a corner formed by the intersection of the outer wall and that front gate, right there, where you see a stone column with animals represented in circles all the way up that column. It's two corners right in the corner showing dancing girls on one side, animals on the other. And here's what's in the center of that 10-foot column. into prom that was dedicated over 820 years ago. They were seeing dinosaurs and depicted them very, very accurately. This is just, I think, more proof of the co-occurrence of humans and dinosaurs. Now, let's move to the significance of this. Notice a statement by Louis Jacobs of SMU. He's very much an anti-creationist, president of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology. And he's commenting on some things he's heard, though I don't think he's really seen the evidence, in his book, Quest for the African Dinosaur, and refers to this claim of the co-occurrence of men and dinosaurs. Such an association would dispel an earth with vast antiquity. The entire history of creation, including the day of rest, could be accommodated in the 7 biblical days of the Genesis myth. Evolution would be vanquished. Now, this is his assessment, and I think he's absolutely right. If you demonstrate the co-occurrence, this is what it means, and the evolutionist understands that. Now, I don't know why we're afraid to jump on this kind of evidence, because they have said, all right, this is what you need to show us. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to be honest enough to accept it, but there are an awful lot of people that will and do. Looking back at the statement we referred to earlier by Stephen Stanley of Johns Hopkins, he says in the beginning of that quote, there's an infinite variety of ways in which since 1859, when The Origin of Species was published, the general concept of evolution might have been demolished. Now, that's his term. Consider the fossil record, a little-known resource in Darwin's day. The unequivocal discovery of a fossil population of horses in Precambrian rocks would disprove evolution. More generally, any topsy-turvy sequence of fossils would force us to rethink our theory, yet not a single one has come to light. And, of course, won't, as long as he won't come look. We've invited him down. He refuses. We did have a professor from University of Houston come down, got within about 50 yards of the tracks there at the Paluxy and looked out and said, I don't see any tracks, and turned around and left. And then we said, Dr. Safersman, come on down, we'll show you. Now, I've been here, I didn't see any human tracks, and he left. And so he tells his students he was there, and he didn't see any. And Stephen Stanley's been invited. Not a single one has come to light, and won't as long as he doesn't look. As Darwin recognized, a single geographic inconsistency would have nearly the same power of destruction. Now again, these are the terms that they're using. Just one, he says, would be enough to rip it. Because you could not, if it's down, it's supposed to be up. That's the real test. And we've shown all kinds of inconsistencies in the geologic column. From the Malachite man, the fossil footprints from 3 places in Texas, New Mexico, Turkmenistan, dinosaur petroglyphs from Mexico and Peru and Cambodia. If you're really honest, how much would more make any difference? There's just a big pile of it, and according to the evolutionists themselves, this would demolish. This would have the same power of destruction. This is their analysis. This would disprove evolution. Or as Jacob says, it would be vanquished. Well, I agree with all of them. I think, and you'll just have to decide for yourself, have we demonstrated the co-occurrence? If we have, that is the implication. We want to conclude with the statement made by NOVA, who sent people down there. They had 2 weeks of investigation and filming. The people there were excited. They felt like they had really earth-shaking evidence, and went back, and the editor killed it. They did do a short blurb called God, Darwin and the Dinosaurs, in which they said there is nothing at Glen Rose that looks anything like a human footprint. Now, that's exactly what they said. But then went on to discuss it, and I think we can understand why. Referring to dinosaur footprints side by side with humans, which was claimed, they deny, finding them would counter evidence that humans evolved long after the dinosaurs became extinct, and back up the claim that all species, including man, were created at one time. They said this is what it would mean, and we're not going to do that. And I think I know why. It's not science. It's about philosophy. It's about religion. And it's just bad science in order to defend their religion. But that's the implication. And they're right. That's exactly what that means. And if you think that we've proved our case, then that's the implication of it. All right. Let's see if some of you have some questions. Yes, sir.
It seems like you're inviting a lot of universities and you don't seem to make friends there. Why is it that they invite you?
Well, usually they don't, but the creation clubs on campus have the right to use the auditorium, and they usually have to go through a lot of excuses and book it 6 months ahead, but they can, and there I am, and there's not anything they can do about it. Though sometimes I'm invited. At Texas A&M, I mentioned earlier, I was invited by the physics department, and we addressed the professors and the grad students. And when it was finished, it was about a 40-minute presentation of what you've seen tonight. So most of what you've seen summarized. The head of the department got up and he said, "Well, Dr. Patton, I find that absolutely compelling and unanswerable. And I just have to accept that." And he turned around and sat down. And we had lots of questions, but not one negative note sounded that day. So it's not always negative. That was just it shocked the daylights out of me, because I was used to more, aliens or, somebody carved toes on it or something, falling down cracks or back in caves and all kind of ad hoc explanations. I was talking to one professor. Actually made a presentation at a university in Tennessee, State University in Tennessee, to a group of senior geology students, and they all turned around to the head of the department when it was over and to see what he was going to say. And he said, "Well, we don't know that there weren't dinosaurs back there that had human feet." And I thought a minute, and I said, "Well, I guess that's right. We don't know that. We also don't know that there weren't humans back there with dinosaur feet. Wouldn't that make about as much sense?" We don't. Wouldn't it be more reasonable to say these things that look like dinosaur feet were made by dinosaurs, and these things look like human feet were made by humans? No, he wouldn't agree with that. I said, "Well, if they were human tracks, would they look any different?" And then he just got up and left. That was the end of it. And about half of them became creationists that afternoon. We get very encouraging results. I was at the University of Arkansas about a year ago, and there were 3 geologists who attended. The professors would not attend. These work for the state of Arkansas, and so we're not in academia and probably a little freer. They were very antagonistic the first night in their questions. The second night, you could tell that it had toned down some, and there was more information type questions. The third night, they heard the lecture you've heard tonight, and there were no questions. The fourth night, they were there, but the one who had sort of been the leader came up to me after it was over. And he said, "We 3 geologists have been here each night. And I'll have to say we're impressed. In fact, we're just convinced that evolution cannot be true. And we've just got to start over. Now, what should we read?" So we had some books for him to read. Sometimes they're ready to tar and feather you, and of course that happened in the Lord's day too. And some of them won't believe if they got somebody raised from the dead, but there are honest people out there, and we ought not to be so conceited to think we're the only ones that are. And some of them have only heard one side, and they only see one view, and it looks pretty impressive until they see the alternative view and a consistent presentation. And that's all it takes. I had a geologist who had graduated with a PhD from the University of Alaska call me. This was about 2 weeks ago. And he said, my pastor made me look at your videos. And he said, and I'll just quote directly, he said, it changed my life. And he said, I want to order 3 more sets. He said, I'm going to change some more lives. So don't think people won't be affected. A lot of them won't, but a lot of them will. And we're looking for the honest hearts. Other questions? Yes.
Many years ago, I read Dr. Morris's book, The Genesis Flood, and in there was the verdict track, and many people here know about that. And they discussed it in National Geographic in, I think, 1939 or 1940. So I went down to the Denver Library and checked it out and made a copy of the article. And I forget the guy's name who was down there, you mentioned it, but he said in that article that if these are truly human tracks and the whole science of historical geology is wrong, and the geologist might as well take a truck driving, because he realized the significance of it.
No. I'm not sure I'd want him on the road either. Go ahead.
I coined a phrase from the O.J. Simpson trial, but it applies to the evolutionists. If it doesn't fit, you must omit.
Yeah.
And that's what they do, is they omit anything that doesn't fit their preconceived ideas.
We've had a number of occasions where we've seen deliberate destruction of evidence at probably half a dozen times. Yes.
Patton, did you read the story of Martin Lockley's recent footprint find down in Mexico? Do you have any opinion of that? Or he said it was only 10,000 years old, of course.
Yes. I'm anxious to get down there to see it. I probably will be able to later this year. Until I've seen it, I wouldn't comment. But I'm not sure. It's very intriguing. They thought it was much older until they saw what it was. It's amazing how that clarifies the picture for them. Yes.
You showed those pictures, I guess, from the Incas,
Yeah.
implied strongly that they had live dinosaur sightings maybe a couple of thousand years ago, which would have been a couple of thousand years after the flood. Do you have any thoughts about why they might have had live dinosaur sightings 2,000 years after the flood, but 2,000 years after that, we don't seem to see any at all?
Well, there's some pretty interesting accounts from the Congo and Papua New Guinea, and not that we can say have been confirmed, but there's some interesting evidence. Maybe they're not all gone yet. The environmentalists tell us we're losing about a species a month, which I think is probably overblown, but I don't see new ones popping in every month, but looks like a downhill process they're talking about. It is going downhill, and things are becoming extinct, and we know of dozens of examples of real things that have become extinct. This would be another example. If they were living around Denver, I suspect we'd want to shoot them. If you saw Jurassic Park, you'd understand why you certainly wouldn't want them around where you were. We read about dragon slayers, and they were famous for killing these things. They wanted to get rid of them. Maybe that had something to do with it. Some have really struggled, and is a very interesting character. He was 20 years head of the Department of Medicine at the University of Lima. His father had begun collecting burial stones from the Inca tombs back in the 30s, and he continued collecting them. He now has had over 11,000 at the time of his death. He lives in a 300-year-old castle right there on the town square. His great-grandfather established the town, descendant of the conquistadors, and they live in this castle, and he's made part of it into a museum that displays these stones. About a third of them display some of the most disgusting pornography you could ever imagine, I hope. I won't show you those, but about a third of them show dinosaurs. We were able to get into the tombs, and we participated in excavations. If you see the video on this evidence, arches, and under them, the Anasazi Indians drew petroglyphs. And here we see Dr. Swift pointing towards some of the petroglyphs. Just above my head, you see the Anasazi warrior, and you see the snakes. But we almost have enough dark to see the Brontosaurus. That is very clearly there. Now, it's covered with desert varnish. Let me back up again here. And so it's very difficult to photograph, but there is the shape that is unmistakable, that you can see. Once it's been pointed to, you can still see it pretty clearly. A turvy fossil. In Colorado, we have this made by the Fremont Indians, who were contemporary with the Anasazi, that looks like the Triceratops, the three horns, the frill. Across this at an angle to show more information. Again, a reach. Sometimes you've got interior structure, sometimes you don't. But if you do, then you've got pretty good evidence. And sure enough, at that angle, you can see the bone in the interior. In fact, we've been able to trace ligaments from one end to the other. Dr. Dale Peterson of Oklahoma City, in fact, the last lecture I heard him give on this was an hour and a half, and you don't want to know all that about this. But he's traced the ligaments from one end to the other, and with the x-ray here, you can see the interior structure and the obvious shape. Down further south in Texas, about 100 miles south from Glen Rose, near London, Texas, is this rather picturesque scene where back about 1940, a fellow was fishing, saw a strange-looking rock, broke it open, and here's a hammer in it. This is the same geologic horizon that we have at Glen Rose. This is the lower Cretaceous, but the whole area is composed of the Cretaceous concretions, which is supposed to be 140 million years old. Obviously a turvy fossil. Up in Oklahoma, we found this iron pot that was embedded in the coal, supposed to be 295 million years ago. Here's the affidavit of the fellow who was working for the utilities company, broke it open with a big sledgehammer, and here's the cast and the mold on either side, and the pot falls out. This is his description of it. That's obviously a turvy fossil. In Utah, near Blanding, Utah, Dinosaur Natural Bridges National Monument, we have these beautiful down the back of the neck. It looks more like a Triceratops than some of the people there, supposedly represented by the Fremont Indians. Obviously a turvy fossil again. This one's from the Grand Canyon, again with a heavy desert varnish over it, which is an indication of antiquity. Somebody shot him in the tail, and you can see what happens if you tried to mess with it today. If you tried to do any carving, it would really show up, breaking through that desert varnish. Another turvy fossil. Okay, let's travel down to South America and see other evidence that tests the column and shows these turvy fossils, which are the test, which is the use that we make of the column. Dr. Javier Cabrera passed away just a few years ago, in December of the year 2000. We'd made several trips down there talking with him.